In 1975, a pastor and his young daughter vanished from their Tennessee parish home, leaving their community in despair. 27 years later, a new pastor finds children's clothing and tapes in the church basement. Those tapes expose a trusted treasurer's chilling conspiracy. What was the dark truth behind their disappearance? The summer of 1975 draped Bethany, Tennessee in a golden haze. Cottonwoods lined the streets of the small town, their leaves rustling in the warm breeze. The air carried the scent of honeysuckle and freshly mowed grass. Bethany was a place where neighbors waved from porches and children rode bikes until dusk. At the heart of the community stood Grace Baptist Church, its white steeple piercing the sky. Pastor John Grayson, 38, was the town's spiritual anchor. His sermons, delivered with a quiet intensity, drew crowds from neighboring counties. His blue eyes held a kindness that made even strangers feel seen. His daughter, Hannah Grayson, 7, was his shadow. Her auburn curls bounced as she darted through the church halls, her laughter echoing during Sunday potlucks. Everyone said she had her father's eyes and her late mother's spirit. On July 12th, the church hosted its annual picnic by Miller's Creek. Tables groaned under platters of fried chicken and peach cobbler. Children played tag, their shrieks mingling with the strum of banjos. John stood by the creek, Hannah at his side, her hand in his. He wore a simple button-down, his tie loosened in the heat. Hannah's sundress, yellow with tiny daisies, fluttered as she tugged him toward the dessert table. Clara Reed, the church treasurer, watched from a distance. At 45, Clara was a fixture in Bethany, her severe bun and starched dresses as familiar as the church bell. She managed the church's finances with an iron grip, her ledgers flawless. But her eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, lingered on John too long, a fact noticed only by a few. That night, John and Hannah didn't return home. Their modest parsonage, adjacent to the church, stood dark. The front door was unlocked, a glass of milk half drunk on the kitchen counter. Hannah's teddy bear lay on the living room floor. The police searched the house, the church, the creek. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. Theories swirled. Had John fled with Hannah, overwhelmed by grief for his wife, who died in childbirth? Had they been abducted by drifters passing through? The congregation rallied, organizing search parties that scoured the woods. Flyers with John's and Hannah's faces plastered every storefront. Clara Reed wept at prayer vigils, her voice trembling as she spoke of John's devotion. But weeks turned to months, and hope faded. The case grew cold, a scar on Bethany's heart. 27 years later, in the autumn of 2002, Pastor Daniel Harper stood in the basement of Grace Baptist Church. At 42, Daniel was new to Bethany, his first posting after years in Memphis. His sandy hair was flecked with gray, his hazel eyes warm but weary. The church had hired him to revive its dwindling congregation, a challenge he embraced. The basement, damp and cluttered, was his latest project. The space was a maze of sagging boxes, broken pews, and rusted filing cabinets. The air smelled of mold and old hymnals. Daniel was sorting through decades of neglect, hoping to convert the basement into a youth center. As he moved a stack of crates, his foot caught on a loose floorboard. It creaked, revealing a gap beneath. Curious, he pried it up with a crowbar. Under the floor was a metal box, its surface pitted with rust. Daniel's pulse quickened. The box was heavy, its lock corroded, but intact. He carried it to his office, a small room off the sanctuary, and set it on his desk. The office was sparse, a wooden cross on the wall, a bookshelf of theological texts, a window overlooking the churchyard. Daniel fetched a screwdriver and forced the lock open. Inside were children's clothes, a yellow sundress with daisies, a pair of scuffed Mary Janes, a knitted sweater. A teddy bear, its fur matted, lay nestled among them. There were also 3 audio cassettes, labeled 1975 in faded ink. Daniel's stomach churned. He recognized the sundress from old newspaper clippings about Hannah Grayson's disappearance, preserved in the church archives. Daniel owned an old cassette player, a relic from his college days. He set it up on his desk, his hands unsteady as he inserted the first tape. Static hissed. Then a woman's voice emerged, low and deliberate. July 12, 1975. John suspects nothing. He's too trusting, always has been. Hannah's easier, she follow her father anywhere. Daniel froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but its cold precision sent a shiver down his spine. The tape continued, detailing a plan to remove John and Hannah from Bethany. The syndicate pays well, the voice said. They want the girl. John's in the way, but I'll handle him. The tape ended abruptly. Daniel's heart pounded. He played the second tape. The same voice, now tense. It's done. John fought, but he's gone. Hannah's with them now. The church will never know. The third tape was a recording of a struggle, shouts, a child's scream, a heavy thud. Then silence. Daniel sat back, his hands trembling. The tapes pointed to a crime, a betrayal within the church. The woman's voice had to belong to someone trusted, someone with access to the parsonage. He thought of Clara Reed, the treasurer in 1975, now an elderly recluse living on the edge of town. Clara had been a pillar of Grace Baptist, her name etched on old plaques in the fellowship hall. Could she have orchestrated this? Daniel needed answers, but he knew better than to confront her alone. He locked the box in his office safe and drove to the Bethany Police Department, the tapes and sundress in a duffel bag. The station, a squat brick building, was quiet in the late afternoon. Detective Laura Bennett, 50, with short-cropped gray hair and sharp brown eyes, met him in an interview room. Her desk was cluttered with case files, a coffee mug stained from years of use. "Pastor Harper," Laura said, her voice calm but probing. "What's this about?" Daniel recounted finding the box, describing the tape's contents. He handed her the duffel bag. Laura listened, her expression unreadable, but her fingers tightened on her pen. She played the tapes, her jaw clenching as the woman's voice filled the room. "That's Clara Reed," Laura said finally, her voice low. "I'd know her voice anywhere. She taught my Sunday school class when I was a kid." Laura explained Clara's history. A devoted church member, widowed young, fiercely protective of the church's finances. After the Graysons' disappearance, Clara had withdrawn, rarely leaving her home. "We need to tread carefully," Laura said. "Clara's sharp, even at 72. If she's behind this, she's covered her tracks for decades." Laura secured a warrant to search Clara's home, but Daniel's discovery opened a Pandora's box of questions. Who was the syndicate mentioned on the tapes? Why target Hannah? What had happened to John? The police searched the parsonage basement, finding no further evidence, but the tapes suggested a hidden space, a cellar or bunker, where the crime began. Laura interviewed old church members, digging into 1975's records. The church's financial ledgers, preserved in the town library, showed irregularities, large cash withdrawals, unaccounted for, signed by Clara. Laura suspected Clara had funneled money to the syndicate, but proof was elusive. Daniel, meanwhile, pored over church archives, seeking clues about Clara's motives. He found letters from Clara to John, written before the disappearance, their tone overly familiar, almost possessive. Had Clara been obsessed with John? Had her rejection driven her to this? The congregation buzzed with rumors as news of the tapes leaked. Some defended Clara, insisting she was a saint. Others whispered about her odd behavior in 1975, her insistence that John and Hannah had run away, her quickness to organize vigils. Daniel faced pressure from church elders to drop the matter, to protect Grace Baptist's reputation, but he refused. He visited the parsonage, now a guest house, standing in Hannah's old room. The walls were repainted, but the floor creaked under the same spot where her teddy bear had been found. He imagined her fear, her small hand clutching her father's. Daniel prayed for guidance. his faith tested by the darkness he'd uncovered. Laura's team searched Clara's home, a tidy cottage filled with religious icons. They found no direct evidence, no hidden rooms, no syndicate contacts. Clara, frail but defiant, denied everything. "Those tapes are fake," she said, her eyes cold. "I love John and Hannah. I'd never hurt them." But Lavra noticed Clara's hands tremble when shown the sundress. The detective pressed, mentioning the financial discrepancies, but Clara's lawyer shut down the interview. Lavra released Clara, lacking enough to hold her, but placed her under surveillance. She dug deeper, contacting federal agents about trafficking rings active in the 1970s. A name surfaced: the Dixie Network, a shadowy group that moved girls across the South. Had Clara sold Hannah to them? Daniel returned to the basement, driven by a nagging feeling. He tapped the walls, listening for hollow spaces. Near the furnace, a panel sounded different. He pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. His flashlight beam caught cobwebs and dust, but also faint scratches on the stone walls, marks of desperation. At the bottom was a locked door, its wood warped. Daniel called Laura, who arrived with a forensic team. They forced the door open, revealing a small cellar, a rusted cot, a bucket, a child's drawing of a sun taped to the wall. The air was stale, heavy with the ghosts of 1975. Laura's team collected evidence: hair, fabric scraps, fingerprints, but the cellar was empty. Had Hannah been held here before being moved? The discovery electrified the investigation. Lavra re-interviewed Clara, who maintained her innocence, but her alibi for July 12, 1975, crumbled. A neighbor recalled seeing Clara's car near the parsonage late that night, its trunk open. Lavra traced the syndicate's operations, finding a lead in Chattanooga, a former Dixie Network operative, now in prison, willing to talk. Daniel, meanwhile, listened to the tapes again, searching for overlooked details. The woman's voice, Clara's, mentioned a drop point near Miller's Creek. He hiked to the creek, now overgrown, and found an old bridge, its pilings hollowed out. Inside one was a rusted key, engraved with CR. Clara Reed. Lavra confronted Clara with the key, but she refused to speak. The operative in Chattanooga confirmed the Dixie Network bought girls from rural towns, often through local contacts. He didn't know Clara, but recalled a Tennessee deal in 1975. A young girl, auburn hair, sold for $10,000. Laura's team searched the cellar again, finding a hidden panel behind the cot. It opened to a tunnel, leading to an abandoned barn a mile from the church. The barn's floor was stained with blood, decades old. DNA testing was underway, but Lavra suspected it was John's. Had Clara killed him here, then handed Hannah to the syndicate? Daniel struggled with his role in Bethany. The congregation splintered, some blaming him for stirring up the past. He preached about truth, but his words felt hollow. At night, he dreamed of Hannah, her cries echoing in the cellar. He visited Clara's cottage, hoping to appeal to her conscience, but she slammed the door. Lavra warned him to stay away. Clara was dangerous, her calm facade hiding a calculating mind. The investigation stretched into winter, leads drying up. The operative's information was too vague to pinpoint Hannah's fate. The blood in the barn was John's, confirming he'd died violently, but Hannah's trail was cold. Had she been sold, killed, or hidden elsewhere? Daniel knelt in the sanctuary, praying for a breakthrough. The tapes haunted him, Clara's voice, a constant reminder of evil within the church. He returned to the cellar, sitting on the cot, tracing the sun drawing. A faint inscription caught his eye: HG 775. Hannah Grayson, July 1975. Below it, scratched into the wall, was a single word: Daddy. Daniel's heart broke. Hannah had been here, terrified, clinging to her father's memory. He vowed to find her, no matter how long it took. Lavra, meanwhile, followed a new lead: a Dixie Network safe house in Alabama. Raided in 1985. Records mentioned a girl matching Hannah's description, but she'd vanished after the raid. Was she still alive, carrying the weight of her trauma? As 2003 dawned, Daniel and Laura stood at a crossroads. The tapes, the cellar, the key all pointed to Clara's guilt, but Hannah's fate remained a mystery. The congregation demanded closure, but Daniel refused to let the case die. He placed Hannah's sundress on the church altar, a silent promise to her. Laura staked out Clara's home, watching for any slip. One night Clara left, driving to a storage unit outside town. Laura followed, peering through a crack in the unit's door. Inside were boxes of church records and a locked safe. Laura secured a warrant, her pulse racing. What secrets did the safe hold? Would it lead to Hannah or another dead end? The winter of 2003 settled over Bethany, Tennessee, like a heavy frost. Grace Baptist Church stood stark against the bare trees, its white steeple dulled by overcast skies. Pastor Daniel Carter, now 6 months into his tenure, felt the town's unease mirrored his own. The discovery of Hannah Grayson's sundress, teddy bear, and audio tapes in the church basement had reopened a wound Bethany thought long healed. The tapes, with Clara Reed's cold voice detailing a plot to remove Pastor John Grayson and his daughter Hannah, pointed to a crime that shook the congregation. Detective Laura Bennett's investigation had uncovered a hidden cellar beneath the parsonage, a blood-stained barn, and a key marked CR, but Clara, the church's former treasurer, remained defiant, her secrets locked tight. Daniel stood in his office, the metal box from the basement now empty, its contents with the police. The room felt smaller, the wooden cross on the wall casting a long shadow. He replayed the tapes in his mind, Clara's words. The syndicate pays well. John's in the way, burning like a brand. The congregation was fracturing. Elders like George Hammond, a retired banker, urged Daniel to let the police handle it, to focus on sermons, not scandals. "You're tearing this church apart," George had said at last week's meeting, his voice sharp, but Daniel couldn't stop. Hannah's scratched message in the cellar, HG 775, Daddy, haunted him. A 7-year-old girl, terrified, had clung to hope in that dark space. He owed her the truth. Laura, meanwhile, staked out Clara's cottage, her unmarked cruiser hidden behind a stand of pines. The storage unit Clara visited held church records, but the locked safe inside was the real prize. Laura's warrant came through on January 15, 2003. She arrived at the unit with 2 officers, their breath visible in the cold air. The safe, rusted but sturdy, required a locksmith. Inside were ledgers from 1975, detailing payments to an account labeled DN. Dixie Network, Laura suspected. There were also Polaroids, a young girl with auburn curls, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear. Hannah. Laura's hands shook as she bagged the evidence. A handwritten note, tucked among the photos, read, "Delivered July 13, 75, $10,000. Clara had sold Hannah to traffickers. But where was she now? Laura brought Clara in for questioning. The interrogation room was stark, its fluorescent lights buzzing. Clara sat straight-backed, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes cold, behind bifocals. "Those items aren't mine," she said, her voice steady. "Someone planted them to frame me." Laura slid the Polaroids across the table. Clara's face didn't change, but her fingers twitched. "You sold a child," Laura said, her voice low. "You killed John Grayson when he fought back. Tell me where Hannah is." Clara's lawyer, a slick Chattanooga attorney, intervened. "My client has nothing to say. You have no proof tying her to these alleged crimes." Laura released Clara, but the photos and ledgers strengthened her case. She sent the evidence to the FBI, hoping to trace the Dixie Network's operations. Daniel visited the cellar again, its damp walls closing in. The child's drawing a sun with jagged rays felt like a plea. He traced the scratches, imagining Hannah's small fingers carving her father's name. Lavra had confirmed the barn's blood was John's, his death a brutal end to his fight for his daughter. Daniel found a 1975 church bulletin in the archives, listing Clara as picnic organizer. Had she planned the abduction that day, luring John and Hannah to the parsonage? He interviewed old members, starting with Ruth Miller, 78, who'd taught Hannah's Sunday school. Ruth's living room smelled of lavender, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "Clara loved John," Ruth said softly. "Not like a friend. She wrote him letters, left gifts at the parsonage. John was kind, but he kept his distance. Clara didn't take it well." Daniel found those letters in the church office, hidden in a file labeled donations. Clara's words grew desperate. "You're wasting your life mourning her. I could be everything you need." John's replies, polite but firm, rejected her advances. Had Clara's obsession turned to rage? Daniel shared the letters with Lavra, who cross-referenced them with the tapes. The voice's tone, bitter, possessive, matched Clara's writing. Lavra tracked down a retired deacon, Henry Tate, 80, who'd served with Clara. Henry, frail but lucid, met Lavra at a nursing home. "Clara was secretive," he said, his voice raspy. "She handled the money alone, said it was her burden. After the picnic, she was different, nervous, kept going to the basement, said she was checking supplies." Lavra searched the church basement again, focusing on the tunnel to the barn. Forensic tests found traces of Hannah's hair in the tunnel, confirming she'd been moved through it. The barn yielded more: a rusted knife, its blade stained, buried under the floorboards. DNA was inconclusive, but Lavra believed it was the murder weapon. She widened her net, contacting former Dixie Network operatives. One, a man named Earl Cobb, 65, was serving time in Georgia. Earl agreed to talk in exchange for a reduced sentence. Lavra drove to the prison, a gray fortress in the rain. Earl, gaunt and bald, smirked as she sat across from him. "Heard you're chasing the Tennessee deal," he said. "Red-haired girl, 75. We picked her up near Chattanooga. Paid a woman, church type, glasses. She was cold as ice." Earl described the handoff at a truck stop. Hannah drugged and silent. The Dixie Network moved her to Alabama, then lost track after a 1985 raid. "Girls like her," Earl said. "They don't last long." Lavra pressed for names, but Earl's memory was spotty. He mentioned a safe house in Mobile, run by a man called Viper. Lavra relayed the lead to the FBI, who searched Mobile's records. A 1985 police report listed a girl, about 17, escaping a raided house. She gave no name, her auburn hair noted in the file. Was it Hannah, now 34? Lavra felt a spark of hope, but the trail was faint. Daniel faced mounting pressure. The congregation split. Some demanded Clara's arrest. Others called Daniel a troublemaker. At a town meeting, George Hammond accused him of slander. "Clara's one of us," George said, his face red. "You're dragging her name through the mud," Daniel stood firm. "Hannah deserves justice," he said, his voice steady. "So does John." After the meeting, he found a note slipped under his office door. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like Grayson." Daniel showed it to Lavra, who increased patrols around the church. Was Clara behind the threat, or someone protecting her? Lavra tailed Clara, watching her routines. Clara attended church sporadically, sitting alone in the back pew. One night, Lavra saw her drive to Miller's Creek, stopping at the old bridge. Clara knelt by a piling, her hands digging in the dirt. Lavra approached, flashlight in hand. "Looking for something, Clara?" she asked. Clara froze, her hands muddy. "Just praying," she said, her voice tight. Lavra searched the spot later, finding a buried tin box. Inside was a locket engraved with H.G. Hannah Grayson. The locket held a photo of John, his smile frozen in 1975. Lavra confronted Clara, who claimed she'd found it years ago. "You kept it as a trophy," Lavra said, her eyes hard. Clara's lawyer intervened again, but the locket was another link. Daniel explored the Mobile lead, contacting a retired officer who'd worked the 1985 raid. The officer, Jim Rawls, 70, lived in a coastal trailer park. Over the phone, Jim recalled the girl. Scrawny, red hair, maybe 17. She ran before we could question her. Said someone was after her. Jim had no name, but the description matched Hannah. Daniel shared this with Lavra, who requested FBI files on the raid. The files mentioned a trafficking victim, Jane Doe, who'd spoken of a church lady selling her. Laura's hope grew, but locating a woman 18 years later was daunting. She checked missing persons reports, shelters, and hospitals, searching for any trace of Hannah. The investigation strained Daniel's faith. He preached about perseverance, but doubts gnawed at him. Had God allowed this evil? Why hadn't John and Hannah been saved? He visited Ruth Miller again, seeking insight into Clara's mind. Ruth sighed, her eyes distant. Clara wanted a family, she said. John was her dream. When he said no, something broke in her. She stopped smiling. Daniel found a 1975 photo of Clara at the picnic, her gaze fixed on John and Hannah. Her expression wasn't love, it was hunger. He shivered, realizing Clara's obsession had consumed them all. Laura's team searched the storage unit again, finding a hidden compartment in the safe. Inside was a map, marked with locations across Tennessee and Alabama. One circled spot read Mobile, 75. Lavra drove to Mobile, meeting FBI agent Carla Ortiz, 40, an expert on trafficking. Carla's team raided the old safe house, now a condemned warehouse. They found graffiti on the walls, sons, like Hannah's cellar drawing. A rusted bedframe held a carved name, Hannah. Laura's heart raced. Hannah had been here, leaving her mark. Carla traced the safe house's owner, a Dixie Network associate who died in 1990. His records listed a girl sold to a private buyer in 1976, then reclaimed in 1980. The trail looped back to Tennessee. Daniel received another threat, a brick through his office window with a note, "Leave it alone." He reported it to Lavra, who suspected Clara's allies in town. She interviewed George Hammond, whose bank had handled Clara's accounts in 1975. George was evasive, claiming no memory of the transactions. Lavra found his signature on a withdrawal slip, $10,000, the day after the picnic. Was George complicit? She leaned on him, threatening charges. George cracked, admitting Clara had asked for discreet transfers. She said it was for church repairs, he mumbled. Lavra didn't believe him. She dug into George's finances, finding offshore accounts linked to the Dixie Network. The conspiracy ran deeper than Clara. Spring 2003 brought a breakthrough. Carla Ortiz found a woman in a Memphis shelter, listed as Jane Doe, age 34, with auburn hair. She'd been admitted in 1995, traumatized, refusing to give her name. Laura drove to Memphis, her pulse quickening. The shelter's director, a nun named Sister Mary, led her to the woman, who called herself Anna. Anna was thin, her face lined, her hazel eyes wary. She clutched a worn Bible, its pages marked with drawings of suns. Lavra showed her Hannah's sundress, and Anna flinched, her hands trembling. "Where'd you get that?" she whispered. Lavra spoke softly. "Are you Hannah Grayson?" Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "Hannah's gone," she said, her voice breaking. Lavra didn't push. She collected Anna's DNA, rushing it to the lab. The results came back days later, a match to John Grayson's blood from the barn. Anna was Hannah, now 34, carrying 27 years of trauma. Lavra called Daniel, her voice thick. "We found her," she said. "She's alive." Daniel sank to his knees in his office, tears streaming. Hannah had survived, but at what cost? Lavra arranged for Hannah to be moved to a safe house, protecting her from Clara's reach. As Lavra drove Hannah to safety, Hannah stared out the window, her Bible open to Psalm 23. "He was with me," she whispered, "even in the dark." Laura's eyes stung. Hannah's faith, like Sister Teresa's in the nun script, had carried her through hell. Daniel prepared to meet Hannah, his heart heavy with hope and fear. What would she be like, this child who'd become a woman in captivity? Lavra warned him to move slowly. Hannah's trauma ran deep. As Daniel prayed in the sanctuary, the church bell tolled, its sound echoing over Bethany. Clara Reed, still free, sat in her cottage, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on a photo of John. Did she know the net was closing? Laura's team prepared to arrest her. The evidence tapes, Polaroids, ledgers, locket, map overwhelming. But Hannah's story, her survival, was the final piece. The truth was near, but its full weight waited to be uncovered. The spring of 2003 bloomed in Bethany, Tennessee, with a fragile hope. Grace Baptist Church stood bathed in morning light, its white steeple gleaming against a sky of endless blue. Pastor Daniel Carter, now a year into his tenure, felt the weight of a miracle. Hannah Grayson, the 7-year-old girl who vanished with her father, Pastor John Grayson, in 1975, had been found alive at 34, her auburn hair and hazel eyes unmistakable despite decades of trauma. Detective Lavra Bennett had located her in a Memphis shelter, her identity confirmed by DNA, but the joy of Hannah's survival was tempered by the horror of her story. A child sold by Clara Reed, the church's former treasurer, to the Dixie Network, a trafficking ring that stole her life. Clara's cold voice on the 1975 tapes, the Polaroids, the hidden cellar, and the blood-stained barn painted a chilling picture. John had died fighting for his daughter, and Hannah had endured 27 years of darkness. Daniel stood in the church sanctuary, his hands clasped in prayer. The altar held Hannah's sundress, a yellow relic from 1975, now a symbol of her return. He'd arranged to meet her at a safe house outside town, a quiet ranch where she could heal away from Bethany's prying eyes. Lavra had warned him to move slowly. "She's fragile," Lavra said, her voice heavy. "She remembers pieces, but her mind's a maze. Let her set the pace." Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. He imagined Hannah's small hand scratching Daddy into the cellar wall, her faith carrying her through years of captivity. Like Sister Teresa in the nun script, Hannah's resilience was a testament to grace under unimaginable evil. Lavra drove Daniel to the safe house, a sprawling farmhouse nestled in rolling hills. The air smelled of clover and pine. Hannah sat on the porch, her thin frame wrapped in a quilt, her Bible open in her lap. Her face was gaunt, her eyes wary, but they softened when she saw Daniel. "Pastor Carter?" she asked, her voice soft, almost childlike. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "Hannah, I'm so glad you're here." She studied him, her fingers tracing the Bible's edge. "You found my dress," she said. "I thought it was gone forever." Daniel sat beside her, keeping his distance. "I found more than that," he said gently. "I found you." Hannah's story emerged in fragments, like shards of stained glass. She remembered the picnic, her father's hand warm in hers. Clara's voice, sharp and urgent, calling them to the parsonage after dark. "She said Daddy needed to sign papers," Hannah whispered, her eyes distant. "Then men came. They grabbed me. Daddy fought, but..." Her voice broke. Lavra, standing nearby, took notes, her jaw tight. Hannah recalled the cellar, its damp walls closing in, her cries unanswered. Clara's face cold and triumphant as men took her away. "She said I'd be better off," Hannah said, tears falling. "But I wasn't." The Dixie Network moved her to Alabama, then across the South, safe houses blurring into years of fear. She escaped in 1985 at 17, but trauma kept her silent, drifting through shelters as Anna. Daniel listened, his heart breaking. Hannah's faith had sustained her, her Bible a lifeline. She'd drawn sons, like the one in the cellar, in every place she was held, a silent prayer for freedom. "God never left me," she said, echoing Sister Teresa's words. Lavra asked about Clara, probing for details to strengthen the case. Hannah remembered Clara's voice on the tapes, her visits to the cellar. "She hated Daddy for saying no," Hannah said. "She wanted him, but he loved Mama, so she took us instead." Laura's eyes narrowed. Clara's obsession had destroyed a family, her betrayal a wound on Bethany's soul. Lavra arrested Clara the next day, her cottage swarming with officers. Clara, 72, stood rigid, her gray bun unraveled, her eyes blazing. "You have no proof," she spat, as handcuffs clicked. Lavra held up the locket, the Polaroids, the ledgers. "We have everything," she said. Clara's lawyer, outmatched, demanded a quick trial. The evidence was overwhelming: tapes, DNA, Hannah's testimony, the map linking Clara to the Dixie network. Laura's team uncovered more. George Hammond, the bank manager, had laundered Clara's payments, his offshore accounts tied to trafficking profits. George was arrested, his confession implicating other town officials. Bethany reeled, its trust shattered. Daniel prepared Hannah for the trial, meeting her daily at the safe house. She was reluctant, her nightmares vivid. Clara's face, John's screams, the cellar's darkness. Daniel shared his own doubts, his faith tested by Clara's evil. "Why did God let this happen?" he asked one evening, the stars bright above. Hannah touched his hand, her eyes clear. "He didn't let it," she said. "He was there, in the dark, holding me. He's here now." Daniel wept, her words a balm. He preached about Hannah's courage, urging the congregation to face the truth. Some listened, others turned away, unable to bear the shame. The trial began in June 2003, the Bethany courthouse packed with reporters and residents. Clara sat stoic, her lawyer painting her as a victim of circumstance. Hannah testified, her voice steady despite trembling hands. She described the abduction, the cellar, the men who took her. "Clara said she loved Daddy," Hannah said, her eyes on Clara. "But love doesn't do that." The courtroom gasped as the tapes played, Clara's voice chillingly calm. The Polaroids, shown to the jury, drew tears. Clara's defense crumbled, her lawyer's objections drowned by evidence. Lavra testified, detailing the investigation, cellar, barn, map, locket. George's confession sealed Clara's fate, revealing her as the Dixie network's linchpin in Bethany. Clara took the stand, her voice defiant. "I saved Hannah," she claimed, her eyes wild. "John was weak, mourning a dead woman. I gave Hannah a new life." The jury recoiled, her delusion stark. Lavra whispered to Daniel, "She believes it." "That's the scariest part." The prosecution played the third tape, the struggle, John's shouts, Hannah's scream. Clara flinched, her facade cracking. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, returning with a verdict: guilty of murder, kidnapping, and trafficking. Clara was sentenced to life without parole, her head bowed as the gavel fell. Bethany exhaled, justice served, but scars raw. Hannah moved to a quiet apartment in Knoxville, aided by a victims fund. Daniel visited weekly, helping her rebuild. She enrolled in art classes, her sketches filled with suns and crosses, her trauma finding voice on canvas. She attended a small church, her faith unbroken. "I forgive Clara," she told Daniel one Sunday, her voice soft. "Not for her, but for me." Daniel marveled at her strength, seeing John's spirit in her eyes. Bethany struggled to heal, its congregation dwindled but determined. Daniel stayed, his sermons now about redemption, not denial. Lavra retired, her career defined by Hannah's case. She kept the locket, a reminder of justice won. One evening, Hannah and Daniel walked by Miller's Creek, its waters reflecting the sunset. A memorial stood for John, a simple cross by the church. Hannah laid flowers, her hands steady. "Daddy fought for me," she said, Now I fight for him." Daniel nodded, his heart full. The truth had cost Bethany its innocence, but it had given Hannah her life. The church bell tolled, its sound carrying over the town, a call to hope in the face of darkness. This story uncovered a treasurer's betrayal and a daughter's unbreakable spirit. Do you think Hannah can reclaim her future after 27 years of darkness? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.